Hey there everybody, this is Chaos back with another video on the Bulldozer Barb. Today we're going to do a commentary video. It's my first one of any kind, and it's going to be a full comprehensive tutorial on the build itself. I'm going to try to break it up into a few parts, one of which is going to be aimed toward more casual players who don't have a full understanding of the game. One is going to be based on gearing, so if you're looking to start the build, you have a pretty good grasp, that'll be a good video for you. And also one with a little bit more advanced techniques to basically make the build work for you and get you through some of the harder parts of the game. Also to take care of some of the harder mob effects. So without further ado, let's get to it. So in this video we're going to talk about the build itself, what makes the Bulldozer Barb work, and what it is in general. I named it thus because bulldozers you would think as something real tanky and they could just plow through anything. Well, this is exactly the build that does that. At its best, this build allows you to basically run through everything with the Furious Charge skill. And the Furious Charge skill is a good one to base your build off of because of the damage multiplier. It's 195% weapon damage per hit. And if you're going through a group of mobs, it makes short work of them even if your DPS is really low. What does that usually mean? Well, that means you can use a single hand weapon with the shield and lower your DPS but up your survival rate. So this is the contrast between the other popular build, of course, which is the Whirlwind build. The Whirlwind build gets its most, I would say, use out of dual wielding, and in that scenario you're going to lose quite a bit of survivability if you don't kill fast enough, or if you're fighting mobs that are either kiters or ranged units where you can't continually dominate them with the Whirlwind build. So generally speaking, Furious Charge, if you add the Merciless Assault rune, it will lower basically your cooldown by 2 seconds for every target hit, and this can be done to eliminate cooldown altogether. Now the text on Merciless Assault is a little bit off, because instead of actually hitting 5 unique targets, which one would think from reading the text, it is actually just a requirement to have 5 hits registered during the animation of Furious Charge. So at the beginning of your charge animation to the end of the charge animation, if you could score 5 hits, you basically will cool down the skill itself to be able to reuse it immediately. So that's a huge benefit to the skill. And most of you will go, well, how would you do that if you were only fighting 5 people? You will have to charge through all of them. That's where sprint comes in. If you have less than 5 targets to hit, obviously you can only hit once per charge. If you're using the Furious Charge skill, sprint will act as a hit mechanism during these charges. So basically, if you guys don't know, sprint by itself doesn't generate any hits, but if you couple it with run like the wind, you basically will get tornadoes as you're moving across the map, and it's distance based. The more run speed you have, the more tornadoes you get per cast. It lasts for 3 seconds. It by default comes with a 40% speed boost. So in effect, you should get 4 tornadoes per cast if you ran it all the way through with 3 seconds. But with this build, because Furious Charge is a generator, you should be continually casting sprint while you're charging, and because charge covers a good distance of the area of the map, it will leave tornadoes in its wake. So if you have a tornado, obviously like the Whirlwind build, you're generating hits as you go. My thing is, I think with about 2 mobs, so long as you get a tornado in between them, they'll usually register 1 or 2 hits per charge on each target. So couple that with the Furious Charge hits, usually with 2 mobs you're gonna be in pretty good shape to get a continuous charge going. If it's an elite mob, they're usually bigger. Bigger mobs tend to group up near tornadoes more, and tornadoes will be able to hit them more effectively. So at its best, the Furious Charge and the sprint skill, they're gonna go ahead and keep you occupied with mobs, and you're gonna be running through stuff a lot. So how about the other ones? Well, Warcry Impunity is a staple. If you don't run this, you're probably gimping yourself big time in Inferno. No need to explain this, everybody knows what this is about. 50% resistance, even without the armor boost, is worth it. So we're going to talk about the primary stat because this is another important one. I would say the primary stat's pretty much optional. You can go with anything that you feel comfortable with, and the reason why I say this is because it depends on playstyle. Obviously, Frenzy is still the preferred single target damage skill out there. It makes short work of anything that you're fighting. There's a couple of runes that changes the style Frenzy works. I've played with Sidearm, which is great because if you have a single target, Sidearm actually has the axe that hits the primary target twice. Comes up to about, if you did the math, about 200 or no 127%, something like that. I don't have my math in front of me right now, but basically it's, if you're counting Frenzy alone, Sidearm is your most damaging single target Frenzy you can have. Smite is another one that I played with. If you have a fast attack speed somewhere north of 1.5, 1.6, you can kind of stun lock anything that you're fighting 1 versus 1. So if you have that kind of a attack speed, you can actually proc a lot more life on hit safely with Smite. I've gone and actually used Maniac because my armor has now risen to a point where damage isn't a huge deal, and I rather get the quicker kill speed. And Maniac helps to add 4% per stack, so you can have up to 20% increase in damage. Little less than Sidearm if you're counting Frenzy only, but that would tie into Furious Charge and all the various other skills that you have. So for this, some people have switched it to Bash. It really is what you like. I mean, primary with this one, not a huge deal. So go with what your heart likes and basically go from there. The other skill that I really like is Overpower in this build, because this build in general requires a little bit of life on hit to be successful. And obviously right now one of the biggest synergies with life on hit is Overpower. In a build in general, you want to have a few answers to a few things, one of which is going to be how you deal with crowd control, one of which is going to be how you deal with AoE damage, and those are things like Plague, Molten, Desecrator, even a little bit on the side of Arcane. With Overpower, basically by itself it's just a damage dealer. It has a built-in mechanism for cooldown, so if you crit a lot it will actually come back a little bit quicker. Has a default 15-second cooldown. I actually have my crit chance up to, I believe, 34% with my DPS gear. I could get it back within about 2 seconds, 3 seconds if I'm charging through a large mob. One-on-one fights I could still get it back within maybe about 5 to 6 seconds. And with the help of Sprint and Run Like the Wind, that basically, it's going to be one of those skills that you will like to have. The reason for it is if you add the Crushing Advanced rune, it redirects 30% of incoming melee and range damage for 4 seconds after you activate the skill. The damage portion of Overpower, negligent. You don't need it. Furious Charge basically kills everything fast enough. The redirect, however, the text isn't fully explanatory on how the skill works. The 30% incoming damage that you reflect, not only do you reflect it back toward the target, but it also ignores it outright for yourself. So under the influence of Overpower, you basically are only taking in 70% damage. That's huge. So along with that, every single AoE hit that you get usually comes in a form of a very steady stream of damage, and it procs almost, I would like to say, 10 times a second, if not more. And every single one of those procs or those hits that you get with Overpower reflects back to the target, thus also procting life on hit. And that in itself is going to overly heal you more than the damage income if your armor holds up. So if you're standing in Molten, if you have a plagued enemy, you will pop this and literally want to walk into these pools to heal. If you haven't tried it, try it out. I mean, it doesn't have to be this build, but the combination between life on hit and Overpower, understated. One of the easiest way to find out how powerful this is to fight Golem. Do it in any act, walk into his gas cloud, pop this with a good amount of life on hit, good amount of resistance. You're going to basically come out laughing how strong that is. But incorporating into this build means that you are quite tanky in most situations, and no longer do you have to fear any kind of AoE damage. One of the alternates to the popular whirlwind builds will incorporate overpower. I tend to agree that's probably one of the better methods of using that build, just purely for the fact that you don't want to be dodging all the time, especially if they're kiters, and you're going to be chasing them in Molten for quite a bit. But more on the last skill now is going to be Leap. I don't think I've ever made any single build myself without the use of Leap. Leap is a hard counter to a lot of things, and we talked about crowd controlled and things like that. Leap is a hard counter to illusionists and also wallers, both of which are main reasons I think most classes get killed. Waller for me, ever since I started playing Barb, has been a joke. They never were able to trap you if you have Leap available. So Leap in the sense of this build, I'm using Iron Impact, and that's one of the first skills you get with Leap, or one of the first runes you get. People who've played a Barb pretty well familiar with this, because the tank build from way back pre-patch, the only build that kind of progressed Barbs to begin with, built their entire build around skills like Iron Impact, Ignore Pain. With this build, it's basically the tanky part of the Bulldozer Barb. So the other side of it, outside of the glamorous, Furious Charge, we're also incorporating a lot of tanky elements. So people who are transferring from that tanky build, basically they should have very little issues transferring over, because you still retain a lot of that tankiness, the 1 versus 1 ability, and also now you're just coupling it with a very powerful combination between Furious Charge and Sprint. A lot of the tanky players, however, they will spam Leap, and although that's great and it ups your survivability, it takes away from the utility that Leap gives you. For one example is, if you're playing in the archives, there's chances for you to leap away from an entire fight just skipping over the terrain. You can do so also in Act 3, a little bit earlier parts of it, where you're lighting the actual flames. There's gaps in the actual map where you can leap over and totally avoid the entire fight and then reset and go back in. Wallers, once again, illusionists, if they're fast and they surround you. I always urge people when they're playing this build to save Leap. Leap should be an escape more so than an attack, but there are situations where Leap can be useful, and during one-on-one fights where you're absolutely safe from any containment, then please, by all means, spam Leap to be the tank build that you're used to. So those are the active skills that make it work, and we're going to go to the passives now. Before I go into detail with most of these passives, I'm just going to say one thing about this center skill here, Tough as Nails. Most people here will be familiar with Tough as Nails and Nerves of Steel, and there's a good thread on Reddit right now where they're talking about the most used builds and skills, and these two guys here are staple for hardcore players, and rightfully so, because they up your defensive ability. The only thing is, they do it differently, and if you look at Nerves of Steel, which is still a very popular skill, actually more popular than Tough as Nails right now, what it does is basic. It's 100% of your vitality turns into armor. If you stack Vit, if you have like 70, 80k worth of Vit, then by all means please use this, because it's usually going to give you more armor as you're going. Secondly though, if you look at this, Tough as Nails, it's going to increase your armor by 25%. And that might not seem like much, however, you got to remember, as a Barb, we're expected to stack strength, because strength is going to double as an increase in damage and also an increase in your armor. The Thorns portion of this passive, negligible. Once again, damage is not going to be required on that. You don't want to get hit in Inferno anyways, even as a Barb, tanky or not. You want to avoid as many hits as possible, so forget that part. However, if you are looking at your Barb now, let's say you have 1000 strength, it's going to give you 250 of that purely based on strength alone. That's before all your armor pieces added together. If you look at that in Nerves of Steel, you're going to not only need 250 just to balance out on the strength part of it, but it does nothing for you on the other pieces of armor. So you have armors that's like 500 to 600 per piece, you're going to get 25% of that. If your base armor is 3000 per se, you're getting 750 plus the 250 from the strength. You basically have yourself 1000 extra armor. So No need to further, explain this, but please go ahead and if you're still using Nerves of Steel right now, click this and just double check your armor rating. Whichever one's the higher one, use that one. But most of you will probably be surprised once you start taking out Amethyst in this build, because it will allow you to, and put in rubies in its place. You will like this passive a little bit more than Nerves of Steel. So the reason why you choose this, obviously, for survivability. You can go without it if you're going Whirlwind, but once again, this is based toward more survival than it is full-on attack. So the other skill that I like is Superstition. I know a lot of people forego this skill. I'm puzzled as to why, because if you look at it, it reduces all non-physical damage by 20%. And it might not seem like much in many situations, but you gotta remember, if you are playing a Barb, you're most likely dying to things like Arcane, Molten, Desecrator. You're rarely dying from things like an Archer. You're rarely dying from things like, say, a Fallen, or anything like that. You're going to be fighting Occultist. Those are those fat round goat guys in Area Crater. They have attacks that hurt like hell. The other thing what it is it generates fury for you whenever you're in AoE damage and or getting hit by range attack. It's a chance too, but it's a very good chance. So if you're running around in Plague or you're standing in it with Overpower, it's basically going to refuel your fury cost or your fury pool. Sprint's the only spender kind of in this skill set, so you don't really need a lot of fury, but every little bit helps. So Superstition for me, one of the reasons why I choose it is because it's a 20% reduction in damage for all of those painful things. You can, in lieu of this, some people would choose Nerves of Steel and Toughest Nails. You know what? That's good, but this is a build where you require very little of it. I've gone as low as like 24,000 hit points and actually cleared Act 3. And I'll explain more of that in the gearing, portion of the tutorial. But Superstition is 20% reduction in all those damages that count, and no matter how much armor and resistances that you gain, the higher the mob level, the harder it is to mitigate that damage, and having a flat 20% to me makes most sense. I've ran with it, ran without it, I've ran with Nerves of Steel in its place. By far this is, without doing any math or hard data though, by feel. And in Inferno a lot of times you could do all the math you like, but it's about how comfortable you are. Superstition makes me more consistent of a player by ignoring a lot of those damages. Not only that, but once again, if you couple Superstition with Overpower, the healing of Overpower is only so great because it's a percentage of your life on hit. However, by mitigating the damage that is done by these AoEs, you are now healing more for every proc that it hits. So this is a very good combination along with life on hit. I fully recommend it. I mean, if you guys haven't tried it out, please do, because you'll notice a huge increase in survivability, and that's against a lot of things. And the last one, Ruthless. So out of the two passives, this I would say is the optional one. The reason why I say that is because Ruthless is just purely here for a couple of things. One is crit chance to lower the cooldown of Overpower. The crit damage usually is going to overcome Weapon Masters as far as an outright damaging skill. This skill here basically is going to be a useful passive while you're charging. It's a good DPS adder. However, if you feel that your armor isn't exactly the 10-to-1 ratio, feel free to swap it out for Nerves of Steel. If your crit chance is higher, passively just by having items, you don't need the extra crit help. Nerves of Steel is another good thing to replace it with. There isn't too many things on the actual passives list that I would say is going to be a big help to this build. So if you were to swap out Ruthless, I would say Weapon Master if you want to cool down Overpower a little bit more, and lose a little bit of DPS in the process, or just go with Nerves of Steel. If you are running with a lot of good gear with a lot of life on hit, or life steal I mean, instead of life on hit, then you might want to give Bloodthirst a try, but I honestly don't know how good that is because I don't have the DPS to make it really shine. No need for animosity and things like that, so we're not going to cover anything else that doesn't make sense here. I have, however, ran with a variant with Berserker Rage for some boss fights when I was under geared with a challenge that I proposed to myself. and I'll work that in the gearing part of the video. But the mainstay of my build, the way that I run it normally, it's going to be with Ruthless. So that's a gist of how everything works. If you haven't seen the build in action, I would suggest maybe you take a look at my YouTube channel. Of course, if you found this video, just click my name there, and then you would be taken to the channel, and you could look at a lot of different fights that I've had in Act 3 where I ran through it the first time that I presented the build, and you can kind of gauge yourself how this build works in action. So I'm gonna save this portion of it as the first part. If you are kind of intrigued and you want to know how to get started with this build, follow me in the next video. It's going to be the gearing portion, so I'll see you then. Thank you very much.